So I'm going to try to be a little quicker with this business about what shapes our world here. The fellow Steve Hassan, was able to explain things very quickly and concisely. Maybe I'm just giving some more examples to make some things real. But so he was in the Moonies, and he had he absolutely believed that he was there of his own free will, and that everything they taught was right, and that other people were just, you know, working for the devil to deceive them, and so forth. In other words, all outside information that contradicted their belief system came from an evil source and must be shunned. And so what I'm saying is that when he came out, he managed to come out of that. And I'm not going to do his story for him, but what he discovered was that his thinking process was very much altered by means of the processes used to bring these people under their subjugation. And I'm really not an expert in how all this occurs, but sometimes you can, when you learn about the ways things are done, then you see them. And it's easier sometimes to see them in someone else's world, someone else's belief system. It's easier to look at the Moonies or, Heaven's Gate or the Jehovah's Witnesses. And as I said, things are done in varying degrees, but, terrible threats are put over people for the Jehovah's Witnesses. They are afraid they won't be resurrected and be able to be with their family, things like that, if they don't do everything that their leaders tell them to do. If they don't do enough going door to door, and they've got their words for it. It's like if you had a dictionary. I was looking at their terms, and they got terms for this and terms for that, and it's like translating from one language into another. So you could translate that into English, or you could translate that into Mormon. So they've got, what they do on Monday night. LDS people have got family home evening. They've got going door to door, doing whatever they call that. LDS people call that tracting, and that's mainly for the missionaries. They've got, people that disagree with them. They're called, whatever, apostates or something. So they might have the same, people get disfellowshipped. We have people that get disfellowship for apostasy. They've got, because they express a viewpoint or read a scripture or see something in science that's not what their brethren, the anointed slave or whatever they call them, their council of 12 or whatever it is, tell them. And so then they're heretics. And if I looked, and that was point after point after point, it was their deal, and it, I could see that there was a corresponding instance that was very similar in the LDS Church. And you can look and say, well, great, it's not good to smoke cigarettes. We love the word of wisdom. They've got their own gig. They're cool with drinking wine, and the Bible obviously is, and they cited it, and yeah, it's still in LDS scripture the same way. You just never will read that one in Sunday school. And you can get drunk drinking wine. They say you shouldn't. I mean, I'm not saying it's a great idea to drink alcohol, but they have certain behavior controls. I don't like tattoos, but is it that, whose authority is it to say whether you can have a tattoo? What seems ridiculous to me. What about colored hair? What if you have a purple streak in your hair, or a blue streak in your hair or something? I mean, how's that looked upon? Well, that's probably heavily frowned upon in the Jehovah's Witness organization and also in the LDS Church. It's a form of behavior control. And LDS says, the church basically, some of the dogma was, if you have longer hair, it's a symbol of rebellion. And Lucifer was the rebel. Well, people with longer hair, back in the day when they started to say that, a lot of them were against the war in Vietnam. And if you research history, the facts are such that there isn't any really good justification for a lot of what went on there. Sure, there were people, sex, drugs, and rock and roll. Those are, there's a lot of vice there that can mess people's lives up. That's true, but so there are justifications for certain behavioral control items that we can say, hey, well, that looks like that's okay. I can understand because that's bad or whatnot, but it is behavior control, and it is used psychologically to control people in a way that, if you study what's used in group mind control, you will understand more the effect it has on people, so that they learn just to not question, just obey. obey the holy masters, the brethren, the anointed slave, or whatever the label is for that, the vicar of God, the Holy Father, whoever it is that's at head of that organization that claims to have divine authority over the people, can get them to do just about anything they want. And we look and we say, oh, well, we're at mainstream LDS, mainstream, we're just, we're the best of society, and, we're not one of these kooky people that do weird things. But how many of us are waiting to hear it's time to sell everything and leave and go immediately to Jackson County? That's pretty radical, isn't it? We read in early church history some pretty wild things that went on. And when we talk about this information control, we'll see that the story we got about what happened with a lot of things is much different than the primary source documents indicate. But we're a little bit like the unsuspecting spouse of an unfaithful partner that it has no idea what's going on, and when clues appear, tend to ignore them until suddenly they're just too much. Or someone tells the poor unsuspecting woman whose husband is a rascal what he's doing, she may just not believe them. She'll say, oh, he wouldn't do that. I can't believe you'd say that, and use that thought stop process mentally to protect herself from the horror of what these people are asserting. And so she uses what might be termed cognitive dissonance, or some other term for basically being in denial or refusing to look at the facts. And so we see that the Catholic Church did that. They'd say, oh, this is heresy, that's heresy. The Jehovah's Witnesses are notorious for it. All these other things are from the devil. I listened to something from their General Conference or something, and they were saying, apostasy is a mental disease. And so you have to stay away from apostates because they are spreading a disease, and it will spread among the flock, like a disease, right? And these techniques are very effective. So they hold things over people. If they're not good enough, if they don't do their church service that they're supposed to do, they're so many hours of what we'd call tracting. Maybe they do something like home teaching or visiting teaching, or how a lot of people just can hardly handle their 8 children plus callings and visiting teaching and home teaching and everything they got to do and be the perfect person to be good enough. And sometimes I wish, why couldn't I just be like those Christians? They can do whatever they want and just say, Jesus saved me and it's all good. And there goes all the pressure. But we believe that the restored gospel teaches us that faith without works is dead. The gospel in James is different than the gospel taught in the letters, the epistles of Paul, in my opinion. So, of course it doesn't make sense that somebody can just do whatever they want and say, well, Jesus saved me. At least that doesn't make sense to Mormons. It makes perfect sense to evangelical Christians, apparently. And Jehovah's Witnesses are more into the works, but they've got a different approach. So they're controlled and told what to do, and then so they're ostracized if they say something in their Bible study that contradicts what the lesson's teaching, even if the scripture supports it. So they have carefully correlated lesson materials, just as we find in the LDS Church. I mean, there's certain subjects that are focused on, and certain scriptures that are pointed out and used in lessons, and to accomplish the theme of a lesson. But how often do you really go over a whole chapter? When was the last time you studied Moses chapter 7 from beginning to end in a Sunday school class? Talked about, Canaanites getting whacked with blackness so that everybody would despise them, and, all those sort of things. Those uncomfortable ones, you don't read the whole chapter. You just don't, okay? It's correlated for a reason. Because what they want us to learn is what we focus on. And that's why we have lesson manuals. Because if you read the scriptures, you'll see that the Book of Mormon teaches a much different doctrine than what is taught now by the church. I think I'd encourage everybody to watch videos on what the mind control that's done on the J-dubs. It's mind-opening. When we get past the protective programming, we start asking, why do we have all these strange things from ancient culture like Egypt and the layout of Washington, D.C., the Vatican, and the Joseph Smith Memorial? What's up? Why all the obelisks? So I want to make sure that you're introduced to the Mormon Truth videos. Quite a few here. So the Mormon Truth Video Library, the purpose of it is to share truth about the LDS Church, the LDS history, which has been completely whitewashed and obfuscated through the correlation and PR departments of the Church. So we use primary source documents to view things that you won't hear in gospel doctrine class or any other church class, that you won't see in your lesson materials. And also, I look at the contradictions in the scriptures that are existing, as well as those that have been filtered out, journal of discourses, anything that contradicts with the new doctrine, the constantly changing doctrine in the church has to be filtered out, and it is. Kind of like Newspeak in Orwell's 1984. Just let it fade into the sunset, or make sure it just disappears, and then we don't have to deal with it. So when that surfaces, it's a problem for the church, and so they've got the apologetics program, which they used to have at BYU, designed to argue the point of the church, to defend against the obvious problems that these issues bring up, because they show that an all-knowing, all-wise, unchanging God can't possibly be guiding the church and be changing the doctrine, making mistakes, hiding the changes, things that people do, cover-ups. So we use the scriptures and I catalog the issues so that we can clearly see what the problem is. And let's take a look at what I actually have in terms of videos. Got well over 70 now, dealing with all sorts of issues, from translation of the Book of Mormon, Joseph Smith the magician, necromancer, all documented, to the scriptures, to what happened in Nauvoo with the Danites, the spiritual wife system, so forth. Council of 50, and every subject being the latest ones are showing LDS scriptures. Important contradictions, Jesus contradicting himself, contradictions with history, contradictions with science, contradictions with themselves, changing doctrines of Mormonism, basically all the things that would not change if an all-knowing, unchanging God was guiding the church. It shows that Mormonism is not what it claims to be, and it's documented straight through the scriptures. Another truthfulness of the scriptures here. Truthfulness of the Book of Mormon and the church, proven. Yes, it is provable. We got a bunch of them on Joseph Smith and the spiritual wife system, the Danites, from the undercover mission of Joseph Jackson in Nauvoo. The Mormon Truth videos, or the Mormon Truth Video Library, literally it exists because history has been whitewashed. The correlated materials do not show the accurate history of the church at all. From the horrors of the spiritual wife system, Joseph Smith in Nauvoo, which seems to be covered up by Mormon polygamy, and going over what occurred in Utah. I've never seen anything really on the internet, videos discussing the spiritual wife system. We hear of polyandry, but we don't hear the spiritual wife system. I document the massive contradictions in everything to do with the church, with the scriptures which contradict each other constantly. Jesus changes his mind, can't seem to keep track of what he said in one revelation to another. Book of Mormon versus DNC, and Moses and Abraham. Magic in Mormonism, a big topic, heavily documented. We look at the scriptures a lot, see what they say. We can see that the correlated lessons in the church education system, the Sunday school, and priesthood relief society avoid showing us the full picture, or deliberately guided away from what's happening in church history and from the contradictions in the scriptures. The first vision, things that are on the Gospel Topics essays, Book of Abraham, the content in it, which has massive errors, massive linguistic anachronisms, so many things that are actually false history, provably so. The person who wrote it couldn't possibly have been all-knowing or anything close to it. The Book of Abraham issue, but I deal with the actual linguistic and historical issues, linguistics and linguistic anachronisms. The content in the Book of Abraham shows clearly that it wasn't written by Abraham at his time. It wasn't written by somebody who knew history or linguistics or something, because they've got stuff in there. They might have they could have said Abraham was talking on a cell phone and texting his buddies, as well as they said things that happened 3,000 years after it was supposed to have been written. things that are put in there. So the person that wrote it certainly didn't live 2000 BC. Joseph Smith's 9 different versions of the first vision, filled with contradictions that are huge. Of course, on LDS.org, Gospel Topic Essays, posing as an essay, but it's apologetics instead, meaning instead of giving a balanced view and presenting a topic, honestly, they use like a lawyer's point of attack to support one side at all costs, whatever they have to do or say to make their side sound right. So anyway, instead of being honest about what happened, which of course they can't afford to do, they take a few common points from the various stories and try to blend them together to make it sound like they had a lot in common. In fact, they even have a page where they've got a composite view, kind of like a blending of the Gospels, to make it look like the Gospels were in harmony with each other in the New Testament, which they absolutely were not. With looking at the story of the last days of Jesus and that sort of a thing, try to blend it together to give you a nice story. But if you look, the contradictions are pretty bad. So same thing with the first vision thing. Book of Abraham, they're not looking at the content at all. They're looking at the problem that it's been well publicized that the papyrus was available, or copies of it, and has now been translated, actually, for many years. And of course, it had nothing to do with Abraham, nor was it from 2000 BC. It was closer to maybe 100 or 200 BC, and it was a funerary text. Having to it had nothing at all to do with Abraham. So they try to obfuscate things again there, and just say, hey, you'll never be able to figure it out, so just pray about it. And that's what they basically do with all of the DNA and the Lamanites, the fact that 99.4% of the Native American tribes tested show that their ancestry is from Siberia, Northeast Asia, not the Middle East. They were not Israelites. And what we see there, of course, is that the church has changed its tune. They've changed the Book of Mormon preface, regarding the ancestry of the American Indians to among they use a theory basically stating that they blended into a large existing population, which is absolutely contrary to what the Book of Mormon says the case was. And of course, that would only be possible if Noah's flood never happened, which of course there's plenty of historical evidence showing civilizations going right through that period that were not affected by any flood. But the church throws out the baby with the bathwater to try to save the Book of Mormon, and they throw out Genesis essentially and try to be very very vague. But they suggest that Nephites blended into a large existing population. Still managed to have a civil war while blending in with all these. It's so when you try to look at how possibly it could be, but it makes no sense. Anyway, they would have had to been here long before Adam and survived the flood, and contradicts the Book of Mormon promises that Lehi's seed would have this land unto themselves, at least until the Gentiles came. So topic after topic, they try to deal with the fact that science, history, and everything else shows a story that is not in harmony with the stories we get in the Book of Mormon and from the church. All-knowing, unchanging God guides the church. So that's why they have them. Except for they pretend that they're balanced essays now instead of the apologetics when they had it at BYU. They're doing the same thing, but telling us that it's all the information we need to look at, that they filtered it for us, or that they've obtained things because the internet's such a bad place that we can't tell what's false out there. It's all questionable and unreliable and wrong and that sort of a thing. So they know how to filter it. Their essay writers do, and they filter it all right. But in-depth and straightforward, they are not. All these things are carefully looked at, and I put the facts in front of you. I believe that you do have the capacity to figure out whether or not you're being told the truth when you've got it in front of your face, and it's presented where you're comparing what they've got rather than...
The Book of Mormon challenge. False premises built upon. Everything in the Gospel Topics essays, which most people have never even heard of, most of it's covered here. History's been whitewashed, and we seek Mormon truth. coercive persuasion used to keep the members from understanding what's happening, information control. Gordon B. Hinckley, massive contradictions and denials in his participation in the whitewashing of history, the race and priesthood issue, which is another Gospel Topics essay in which the churches deliberately use deception on the church website to obfuscate the obvious contradictions, as it also does with the 9 first vision versions, always trying to lead us to the conclusion that we can't figure it out, we must pray. If we're worthy, then Jesus will witness that it's true to us. Therefore, it's our fault. But think and reason and view and research, no. Okay. Short commercial. Use them as much here as you won't find elsewhere. Exploring tactics used on LDS.org designed to deceive and mislead are documented, along with issues like the Danites, what really happened, not the urban legend that's spun by the Correlation Department. Using primary source materials, I document as much as possible, including using the scriptures and noting how much they are completely ignored or filtered through on LDS.org, especially in the Gospel Topics essays, which state that they are basically balanced, straightforward, in-depth essays on subjects, which is completely opposite of the truth, and I prove that. They're nothing but polemics, apologetics designed to mislead. Please help spread the truth by liking, subscribing, and sharing. Share the Mormon Truth videos with everyone you know. View them, understand them, and see the documentation. See through the deception.